Hi, everyone. Akilah here, and I just recorded a CMC podcast episode, and my guest was John Lundy. He is the Diversity and Inclusivity Program Manager at Ingram Micro. Now, today we had a very candid, authentic discussion around DE&I initiatives. Super excited about this topic, and more importantly, continuing the conversation. We've been talking about it for a while now, but he really shares ways on, okay, outside of the actual conversation, how you can actually implement DE&I strategies in your company. So I hope you take a listen, and I hope you get a lot of tips and pointers on how you can be part of the solution. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this next episode of Channel Maven podcast. My name is Akilah Murrell, Senior Director of Channel Marketing here at Channel Maven, and I have with me today John Lundy. He is the Diversity and Inclusivity Program Manager at Ingram Micro. Welcome to the show, John.
Yes, hello, Akilah, and thank you, Channel Maven, for having me. I am absolutely honored. I appreciate every opportunity to not only learn from you, but to partner and explore how we can improve upon how we build culture and the face of work, right? So thank you for this opportunity. I'm really humble.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have you. So before we dive into our topic today on diversity, equity, and inclusion, can you tell our audience a little more about your background and your current role at Ingram Micro?
Yeah, thank you. So just a little bit about me. So I'm an inner city kid, and that doesn't necessarily need to be the qualifier to be in this space. But the reason I lead with that is because I was raised by my grandmother. I was raised serving in communities of marginalized folks and have naturally built a connection with individuals who are coming from somewhat of a disadvantaged background. So I've been on this journey my entire life. I'm not going to tell you my age on the podcast, but it's been some time. But beyond that, my foundational knowledge has been around the recruitment space and being an ex-college athlete and an individual who is an ultra learner or considers myself an ultra learner. I've continued to be this healthy disruptor, this individual who challenges how are we in position to define and identify future talent by going about it through unconventional means. And so my role as a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging leader here at Ingram Micro is really more of a catalyst, as an ambassador, to serve as something that we've continued to do and have success with ensuring that we amplify the voices of the marginalized communities. And so, yeah, I feel fortunate to be able to interface with all levels of folks and really unlock potential for not only leaders, but for associates to excel.
That's great. And I really like that you led with your background, right? I believe on your LinkedIn profile, you have your grandma's boy. And
yes, ma'am.
That's important. That makes you who you are today. And when we talk about diversity, we're all coming from so many different backgrounds. There's not one avenue, there's not one path. And I think it's important to know that. And I love how you included that on your profile. It just gives us a little more of an idea of who you are. And that's great. I think that's great.
Thank you.
I mentioned at the beginning, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there also is the B, right? We talk about DEI&B. So obviously it's very clear at Ingram Micro that you all are taking this seriously, right? You're in the role specifically to fulfill this need. But before we talk about how Ingram Micro approaches inclusivity as a large tech company, really leading the way, can you define what the B stands for, just in case folks in our audience haven't really heard about that yet?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in my perspective, the belonging has to do with having the ability to feel like you can be your authentic self. You kind of you open the door for me. I'm comfortable telling individuals that my brother is an individual on the neurodivergent spectrum. I am actually dealing with my own unconscious bias and working on myself, but it's feeling authentic or having the ability to be your authentic self. The terms that I've heard through mentors is you define diversity as being invited to the party, right? Or if you can look at it as a dance or as a get together, as a gathering, but diversity would be is being invited to a party. The inclusion would be being asked to dance. The equity piece is being able to choose the DJ or choose the specific music that we're going to be listening to. But the belonging is being able to dance how you want, being able to thrive and shine. And again, live out your true purpose in the work sense. I can tell you in my journey as a professional, and your seasons are going to change, but through my journey, this is the first time in my career, and it's been again, now I'm going to age myself, a 15+ year career, that I can actually say I'm living my authentic dream. I'm living my authentic self. I'm being my best self and bringing my best self. So belonging is ensuring that not only is your voice amplified, but you'll have a space to have that psychological safety in order to express your viewpoints and have it respectfully received.
Oh, perfect. I mean, that's exactly what it means. I love, love, love that. And when you can bring your whole self, and I'm like you, right? This is the first time in my career where I can actually bring my whole self, my authentic self to the table. And actually, we can even go a step further. I think in corporate America, oftentimes you're somewhat invited to the table, but you don't have a voice, right? You're just there as representation. We've checked the box off. We've got our minority employee. She's sitting right there, and so you look good on the outside, but kind of you don't really have an opportunity to share your authentic voice. And so what we're seeing now is invited to the table, we sit at the table, but we also actually probably lead discussions now or some sort of leadership role. So belonging is important because you're right. It talks about bringing your whole self, and that's key.
Yeah, and I'll add a little more nugget. I call it my ninja nugget. But the other aspect of it is knowing that, or having the ability to say, these are my gaps, or these are my shortcomings, and here are my opportunities, right? And the reason I say that is because through my journey in this space is I recognize that how we frame our mind and our position really drives the future outcomes for whatever it is that you're looking to execute. And I'm leading with this because specifically I used to struggle with feeling like, am I the token guy in this room? Because I don't want to be the token, but if I'm not the token, who else is going to be in this room? And is there anyone that's better than me? And so what I've had to do is reframe my mind, again, focus on the neuroscience and how I'm positioning opportunities in my own head to recognize that I'm here for a reason. I'm here because I put in the work. I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and continue to ask those disruptive questions, those questions that are going to make us uncomfortable, but ensure that everyone is being recognized. And so there's so many opportunities in this space. And, again, another cliche that's often used is this is a marathon, not a sprint. And my natural inclination as an ex-college student athlete has been to have a goal, hit that target, and then move on to the next, but recognizing that all of us are in different phases of our race. And so my opportunity is not only ensuring that I could bring up folks behind me that look like me, but also capture the opportunities to then be an amplifier of the individuals that don't have a voice, right? So, yeah.
That's really important. Like just having this conversation, because there are folks that don't have a voice, right? And so having this conversation becomes even that much more important for people who really are not at that point where they feel like they can share their voice, and some that just can't. So I really appreciate this conversation with you. Okay, so we were talking, thanks for sharing those experiences. I think that's really key to this discussion. Now, when we look at companies like Ingram Micro, what I hear you saying is we have to be intentional about who we recruit, who are going to fill the seats in our company. So how are you all doing that at Ingram Micro?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So to kick this off, what's important is that, or at least what was important for us in building a structure or a framework around this opportunity, was ensuring that it wasn't specifically another HR initiative. We wanted to ensure that our business leaders had a stake or had a really clear position in driving the outcomes here. And so as we looked and as we continue to uncover opportunities to identify leaders or future leaders for the business, we started by listening and learning what was important to the organization. And so we started by identifying and really building some structure around our ERGs, our employee resource groups. Now we had, and we've traditionally continued to and will continue to support women in technology, women in leadership, as well as the LGBTQIA community, where we have offices around the country that have a significant footprint here. But what was important in us recruiting is ensuring that we not only understood the good faith targets, but also where we wanted to identify and build more branding and awareness around these areas. So to give you an example, in our New York campus, we're hyper focused on our disability network. We have an opportunity to not only diagnose, but retrofit and ensure that we have the landscape, the tools that will ensure that individuals thrive once we recruit and bring them in. A part of that journey starts with the education of the hiring managers. This is these skills are what's going to be required of you as a leader to then bring in individuals with disabilities. And so we're starting down the journey of educating, right, listening, learning, but educating first to then get out all those questionable or those potentially questionable questions that are going to have or happen through our hiring managers, right? Can I call an individual deaf? Can I call them blind? And so really just ensuring that not only are we calling out our own biases, but that we're supporting our leaders by providing a framework that will ensure their success, but also ensure their comfort in being able to tap into us. Where I've been probably too aggressive is focusing on areas that we rarely talk about. And this is just me being a radical in this space, is focusing in areas where we don't really have any representation or 0.01% representation, which is the indigenous networks. Like, we have a campus in Arizona. And so tapping into not only the networks or the communities that are building up capabilities in those areas, but then challenging our hiring managers to say, hey, if we have good faith targets where you're going to bring in 1 in 3 individuals are going to be in a diverse category, why are we not looking at leveraging, or help me understand how we do not see the value, or what can we potentially do to invest in the indigenous networks to ensure that they also have the visibility to these opportunities. So marketing our roles through indigenous networks and sites, also pitching our positions through career fairs through indigenous networks. So again, to your point from earlier, being more intentional around where we are focused from a recruitment perspective, and then the golden nugget or the platinum opportunity in all of this is driving accountability through leadership and through our recruiters to continue to maintain this.
That's great. I think the theme here is going to be being intentional. So for those listening as well, wanting to know, well, what do we do? What can we do? The first step is you have to have a plan, and then you have to be intentional about carrying out that plan. And I like how you also mentioned, it's not just necessarily a race issue, right? What about disabilities? How do we accommodate folks who learn differently? How do we set them up for success? And, I honestly feel like sometimes it's a little bit of a pain point for me that we have to be intentional and we have to kind of force ourselves to think that way, because I feel like it should just be.
Totally.
Don't you think? It should just be a given. Why wouldn't we include everyone?
And that goes back to my earlier reference with regard to just being a sprinter in this space, is recognizing that we all come from a place of privilege, unique privilege in the sense where we don't have to worry about some of these things. And so highlighting that, hey, there are 250,000 veterans transitioning annually, and there's 25% of those or greater that are labeled disabled or classified as disabled. There is a refugee community that as a country we're accepting and ensuring that we're going to grow within our US, within our culture. And so how do we provide access to opportunities for those individuals? There's a second chance. We're changing legislation with regard to our, how we're viewing individuals coming from the incarcerated ranks. How are we looking at them? And is there any opportunity that we can uncover that individuals who may have somewhat of a blemish in their backgrounds can then achieve success and then thrive in technology, right? So it's having those uncomfortable questions, but to your point from earlier, being intentional about it, but then also taking a step back, recognizing, hey, let's ensure that everyone is speaking the same language before we then go down this path.
Right. And I think that's what is so unique about Ingram Micro is you then are training the folks, the stakeholders, you're holding them accountable. And I believe you use the term Inclusivity Learner, I believe is what you had mentioned. So I think that fits this right here. What do
Yeah.
you mean? What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. So thank you for the question, right? So I'm not a expert in this space. What I did was I went to some of the top think tanks. I went to the MITs to understand the data, because at the end of the day, it's still a business that we have to run and have to ensure that we're driving profit. And so I had to learn to speak more clearly with respect to what is the business return on investment value proposition, for lack of a better term, but how can I then frame this so that the business grasp it and really wants to run with this, right? So at the end of the day, when I say inclusivity learner, is that I'm ensuring that I'm not only listening to all categories or all opportunities, but I'm also providing the statistics around here's how this will contribute to success within our four walls or within our operations, within our supply chain, and within our corporate environment. Some things are going to be highly attractive in the US. Some things are not going to be as accepted in UAE or maybe even Manila. And so recognizing that inclusivity learner also ensures that as you learn in this space or as you take this ultra learning approach, you're also recognizing that you have to become familiar with the cultures of the communities that you're looking to impact, right? So you have to learn around, there's certain things, again, women are still looking to thrive in certain areas in EMEA and in other countries. And so just taking that ultra learning approach holistically, but also ensuring that you can speak the language of the organization and really drive outcomes through that language.
Right. That's great. That's important. Now, what about, folks who are listening and they just think, okay, great, it's another big initiative and it's too big and they're overwhelmed. And so they don't do anything. And here goes another year and it's the same old thing.
Yeah.
Well, how would you advise them? I feel like really there is no excuse for that with all of the resources that we have now. You could go online, you can go on social. There's so many ways that you can tap in. Maybe you even partner with an organization like the Equal Justice Initiative. I believe that's with I can't even drawing a blank on his
Brian
name.
Stevenson.
Brian Stevens. Thank you, Brian Stevenson, who we actually got to listen to him a couple of years at Inbound in person, and powerful. So even an organization like that, giving inmates a second chance, like there's ways to go about just being part of the solution, not the discussion, because we've discussed it. Now it's time to implement. So what piece of advice would you give to someone who is trying to lead that specific initiative within their organization? How did they begin? Where did they begin? What should they do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So what I struggle with, and hopefully this will help someone, is recognizing that there are so many opportunities and resources and tools that we can leverage, and you can't do everything. Unfortunately, we would love to be able to say that we have the same budget as marketing or same budget as HR, right? If you look at human capital as an index, our largest expense in the organization is our payroll. And so why can't we invest more dollars here, right? But at the end of the day, you have to ensure that you understand what the appetite is for the business, right? You can't go in hyper aggressive to say, we need to bring in more brown folks and put them in management. That's not going to be the recipe for success. Understanding by listening to the senior leadership or the executive leadership team to understand what are they open to. So my example would be, I positioned us at Ingram Micro to then 7 years back to, hey, there's this opportunity for us to build diversity, equity, inclusion strategy. I got a lot more doors closed and no's than I cared to admit. But then I recognized, okay, in my dynamic of senior leadership, I have two individuals who are from the military, officer level. I have one individual who's a female who speaks to, several nonprofit boards. And so I had to learn their language. So I went into the leadership team and said, hey, there's this program of transitioning veterans as well as transitioning veteran spouses that we can leverage. But then I put forward the numbers first. Again, like I alluded to earlier, there's 250,000 plus on the annual basis, specifically in California, where I'm based out of. We have over 30,000 transitioning per quarter. And so breaking that down to the smallest level, but ensuring that you're speaking the language that can be most impactful to the business. I would say first, if anyone is starting their journey here, diagnosing is extremely important. You don't go into a doctor and say, yeah, I've got this sickness, help me understand what it is, or help me figure out what medicines I need to take. You have to diagnose what are the symptoms, what are the challenges that the businesses are facing, and what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve through driving info or driving insights into those areas. And so again, focus on the LGBTQ. If I look at our Manila campus specifically, they've been doing things with parades and donating to various funds and ensuring that they support their associates who may want to march for LGBTQIA rights. Like, those are things that then you can drive a strategy behind, but you have to understand, what is the appetite for the business? What are we capable of doing successfully? And maybe I mentioned this or not, but doing one great thing at a time. Like, don't try to, I used to hear this term quite a bit when I first started this journey several years back, but don't try to boil the ocean. Start with the sink. What's the low hanging fruit, right? That's another cliche that we hear. So I started with early career and entry level talent, right? So let's invest into programs where we can start to offer certificates and various types of badges or check marks for students who are interested in cybersecurity, in IT, in the spaces that we continue to navigate and continue to recruit out of the same areas, right? So I'll get off that tangent, but hopefully I was able to answer your question there.
I think that's valuable information that you just shared, right? You said it right. You said it perfectly. Don't boil the ocean. There's one thing that you can do that will make a difference, and then just build upon that. The other piece of advice that you gave that I really enjoyed listening to as well is, diagnose look at the situation, the current situation, and understand the diagnosis, and then understand where you want to go from there, right? I think that's really important. Don't just come in and you just want to check off boxes, right? To say, oh, we got some, like you said, brown looking people or some females sitting on the board now, or you really can't look at it that way. And I've seen where companies have done that and they're so proud of them. Like, they're just all out there, right? We hired the first African-American so-and-so, and it's so much more than that. It's so much more. And you can make some more meaningful, impactful change when you approach it the way you suggested. You also mentioned, I want to talk about the C-suite, right? I think you mentioned this earlier, when at first, 7 years ago, when you brought this idea to Ingram Micro, which I want to take note. I want us to kind of digest that. That was 7 years ago. A lot of people think, oh, 2020, that's when we started talking about DE&I, or, the George Floyd incident. No, this has been in the works, right?
Yeah.
This has been in the works for years and years. And employees like you and I, we've experienced a lot of these unconscious biases for years. So it's not just something that happened overnight. So my question to you is, when you approached them 7 years ago and leading up to now, because I know there's been major improvements now and total buy-in from your C-suite, but how did you convince them? Like, how did you loop them in on your why? How did you win them over?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, as I alluded to earlier, my initial approach to this was most likely was a little too aggressive. I went in with I can't be the only Black guy in Orange County. Like, we've got to have more folks that we could bring in. And so I wasn't speaking towards the language of the organization, and I didn't clearly define what the value of it is, which, to me, and in my myopic opinion, it is pretty clear. We want to look like the multicultural environments that we live in. But I had to ensure that as I built the value prop or the return on investment for this, that I was speaking at a language that people will accept. And so what I did was I informed individuals that as we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, it's important that we recognize where our gaps are in the business. And so I started with, hey, we have a 15% attrition rate for manager and above. And by focusing on veterans in particular, we're able to bring in individuals who come with those leadership characteristics, who come with the skill set. And by investing into programs, by investing into positioning ourselves at each base around the country, we can then create this pipeline of talent. But not speaking shade on my company, but quite frankly, I think it did take the unfortunate massacre of Mr. Floyd for people to recognize, hey, there are groups who are still being left behind, right? I'll give you an interesting statistic here in San Diego, where I live. It's beautiful, sunny San Diego, California. 50% of our renters are living behind the poverty gap as far as brown and black people. So it's like we're not able to make the advancements if we don't really call them out early. So even though my focus has been hyperly focused on bringing in women in leadership and women, BIPOC women into more responsible positions, I had to recognize that I needed small wins first in order to get to that place. And I'm not saying that they closed, that the doors were closed. And no, we're not going to do that. There's no need to focus on that. I had to recognize that we are still a conservative organization, and how we've generated revenue, unless I'm driving an opportunity to generate revenue, I was going to not be able to capture their interest, capture their audience. And so my initial proposal was to build a framework around inclusion and being a organization that focused on valuing of all levels of talent, starting with, women in leadership or women transitioning, so veteran spouses, and then that's how I was able to get the buy-in. So I hope I answered your question there. But at the end of the day, I think that we needed more of it. And then to go back on my earlier statement, I had to also recognize that no one's really done this the perfect way. There's been companies like the Walmarts who have 200,000 plus employees, and they've been on this journey for 18 plus years. And so I had to learn from organizations that have who have tried and been true to staying committed to this space, to then understand, okay, what were your observations there? Help me understand, what were the key learning points? And so again, going back to the diagnosing, I had to diagnose or do a better job at diagnosing where we were versus looking at us at the surface level and saying, I think this is going to help us work better. Because at the end of the day, what happened was when I approached the C-suite and said, hey, I think we need to, really start to invest in HBCUs and HBCU management type roles. I'm going, okay, well, how will that help us perform the business better? And I stumbled. I wasn't able to say, okay, well, today, I feel much more confident. We've traditionally 70% of our positions are hired out of the same 5 to 10 universities. And so the value prop would not only have a fair and equitable playing field to bring in talent, but to ensure that we measure schools at the HBCU ranks the same way we measure the ones that we have a affinity bias towards, right? So again, ensuring that I was able to speak towards what would drive value in investing in those areas.
Right. And recognizing that it is going to be a challenge. You just mentioned it's uncharted territory. So it may not come easy, but it is a conversation that has to be had, right? You've got to get that courage, and then you do have to get the buy-in from the C-suite, because after all, they're leading the company, they're going to lead the culture. Everyone is looking to them as an example. So it is actually, that may be another point, another tip for someone who's trying to implement some sort of DE&I program, is get their buy-in. You want them to back you up. It's going to be a challenge, but maybe you have to change your approach a little bit on how you approach them, and recognize that you also may have to do some educating, right? Totally. I know early on, I struggled with that. I struggled with, why do I have to educate you on this? You should just know it. But I really had to take a step back and realize, no, that's part of the process. And so if you want to be part of the solution, then you have to be willing to also educate. And so that's an important point, I think, for any of the diverse candidates, right? We can't just sit there and get frustrated. We also are part of that solution, and that's going to require us stepping up, educating, and being okay with it.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Akilah. As well as we have to realize our position today in the current climate is exactly where it should be. In the 60s, they were getting trampled by horses and getting sprayed with water cannons and lynched in the 50s and 40s and 30s. Our situation is not as nearly as challenging as what they went through to get me in this place to then speak more eloquently. But I had to also learn things, again, going back to the neuroscience, that would help me position myself as a better professional, speaking in a tone that would be acceptable, that would build trust, that would instill confidence in them to know that I could run this race. My initial approach, again, 7 years ago was, hey, if we want to focus on this, reparations is real. And they're like, what? Wait, what? What reparations? What are you talking about? How is reparations going to help us impact the business? I'm like, so taking a step back. And so speaking more eloquently towards, hey, here are the opportunities. And quite frankly, if we're really being serious about diversity, equity, inclusion, we would all recognize that the Latinx community is the fastest growing network and skilled talent that's around. Like in the US alone, the Latinx network would be the 7th largest GDP on the globe, like in the world. Mm-hmm. So a true DEI strategy is going to ensure that you're partnering and leveraging the Latinx network as the future forward majority, right? So, and a lot of companies don't have the Latinx focus or the attention towards the Latinx community, unfortunately, today, but we're getting there.
Right. We're getting there. Now, as we wrap it up, I did want to ask a specific question around recruitment, right? We may have touched on this a little bit already, but do you have any other advice on ways that hiring efforts can be augmented to encourage more diverse talent? We hear that a lot in our space, that we're deficient in minorities within the tech space, and then female minorities even more so. So how it does make it challenging, right? You don't have a pool of just candidates who are diverse. So how can we overcome that challenge?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. Again, this goes back for me. I had to check my ego and check my emotions at the door, because I was the first person coming in here going, we need to bring in more Black women in leadership. And that wasn't necessarily the recipe for success, primarily because I didn't define the value structure or the path for those folks to get in here. What I didn't say, we have over 10% of our brown female leaders in this organization that have been with us for 10, 15, 20 years. Investing in them will ensure that we can recruit the future leaders that will lead us to success. And so again, speaking the language, meeting the business where they're at, I had to back it up with truth, with facts. And the facts were, we have several talented brown folks and non-brown. There's folks that have already put in the sweat equity in this organization to be successful. And so instead of us going out and trying to uncover the unicorn or the purple squirrel, let's invest in the folks that are going to do a way better job than us with being ambassadors, being endorsers of the organization around their communities and around the org. But in addition to that, so from a recruitment perspective, I'm a recruiter initially, or at heart, right? So that's my core foundational core competency. And so introducing the organization to tools that will help us alleviate bias, right? So one of the things was diagnosing our appetite for what is it specifically that our hiring managers, that our business is saying that's potentially broken today. One of the things I recognize is that how we recognize or reviewed talent coming in the door is broken. And that's kind of broken because, one, we're looking at names and we're looking at superficial, things that you see on the resume. And so the first thing that we adopted at Ingram Micro was we invested into an inclusivity tool. And so that's ensuring that we have unconscious or clear language, unbiased language in our job description. So recognizing that the reason our funnel is misaligned is because our language in our job descriptions doesn't really attract talent that would be interested in working in these type of environments, at least talent that's coming from marginalized communities. So that was our initial investment, ensuring that we understood what are the tools that we can invest in. And for companies that can't invest in the tools, do some of the basic things like look at your application. Does your application say Hispanic, or does it say Latinx, or does it say Black, white, non, or other? Like just ensuring that you include all groups or understand how do individuals like to be captured in your markets, referenced in your markets, is extremely powerful and extremely helpful in your journey to drive success. We also leveraged what a lot of companies don't have the advantage of doing because of the size of our company. We leveraged our affirmative action plans and our EEO, or Equal Employment Opportunity reports, as an initial bar, not as a rationale or a reason for us to set specific numbers, because we don't want to, go down the road of potentially having like affirmative action issue. We really just leveraged our affirmative action numbers in order to get a sense of where are the opportunities? What does the data tell us to just be one point of adoption, right? And so from the affirmative action plan, we're able to see, okay, well, again, we know our attrition numbers because we're managing that through the HRIS, a HR system, HR information system. And so we can see that we're losing women, we're losing individuals coming from marginalized communities in these specific target areas. And so now how can we create processes so that our recruiters then value the candidates and or only presented candidates where we had targets? And so we leveraged, again, that affirmative action plan, the EEO plan, to just help us with the initial foundation. But from there, it's, again, the education and awareness around what do communities offer and where are we recruiting from, what talent pools are really going to help us drive success in the organization. So I kind of rambled on there a little long, but hopefully I was able to capture your.
Yes,
awesome.
Absolutely. And what you did is you actually captured the fact that anyone can be intentional. Any recruiting efforts can be from small company to large company. Ingram Micro, you have an amazing tool, systems in place. You actually look at the data and analyze the data. A smaller company may not be able to do that, but guess what? There's little checklists that they can make sure in their language, like you said, ensure that they are trying to reach everyone. Even looking at their company website, is there proper representation on their website, right? You don't need a data analytics tool to do that. So there are ways for you to make sure that you are being conscious of your DE&I efforts, if you will. So
Indeed.
This has been great. I could talk about this all day long, honestly, because it's near and dear to my heart, but it's also an important conversation to have. Now, I hope we're not going to be having the same conversation when our little ones are older, because it starts in the home. What are we teaching our children? Hopefully by the time this little generation grows up, this is not going to be, it's going to be just the way of life. Diversity is just good for you. Diversity is good for business. They're going to understand it. But I do appreciate the conversations that we're having, like you and I are right now, because it is needed. That's just where we are in life right now. So lots to look forward to.
Thank you, Akilah. I appreciate it as well. And so the fun actually comes in the execution, right? So to your point, certainly investing into the future generations, the first generation grads and opportunities in that area. But you hit the nail on the head is like taking a really hard look at where are we today? What are we doing as a culture to help influence the future generations? And how can I put a guy like me out of a job, right? I want to be unemployed in the sense where I'm moving over to focus on other things that are going to help us optimize business, operations. And so, I believe it strongly starts at the home. It starts with having that hard discussion. I'll tell you, my wife is Hispanic or Latinx. And so when I brought her home and my grandmother was like, no, she ain't as dark as I would like her to be, I had to say, well, Grandma, I'm not sure you're looking at the love from my spouse the same way. And so I had to take a hard look at what are the areas that I need to work on myself before I can then start to show empathy for other groups.
Yes, so good. That's the perfect way to end this podcast. I couldn't say it any better. John, thank you so much. We appreciate you being a guest on our podcast. Stop by anytime. And looking forward to just continuing the conversation.
Indeed. And I thank you guys again for this opportunity. And I hope to be a resource to you in the future and would love to continue to learn from you as you, uncover opportunities to where businesses can work more efficiently. I'd just love to stay aligned with everything that you guys are doing.
Absolutely.
And sorry, that's a masculine term, not you guys, your team.
Your team, exactly.
Gotta catch myself. So
We're still learning. We're still learning, right? So
All right.